Thanks very much,
Okay.
Erica. That was really helpful. I'm sure a lot of people will have benefited who weren't familiar with Agile about sort of what it is, how it's different, and what the benefits are. So that was really useful. And now we're going to have Pranab Ghosh, who's a management consultant, who has a lot of experience with Agile, both organizations that have adopted it wholeheartedly and those that have approached it in smaller steps. So Pranab, over to you.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks for the introduction as well. Hey guys, really excited to meet you virtually. And COVID-19 has taught us basically to make the best use of our time. And what better use of time than to share some examples and stories from our practical experiences and learn from each other. So here I am. I'm going to talk about two case studies today. One of a large bank and building society, which undertook the Agile transformation, but really developed that at scale. So across the organization, it went for the whole game. And in another example, I'm going to talk about a specialty insurer who took a more conservative approach and used a program to serve as a catalyst for Agile transformation, learned from it, and then rolled that out. Specifically, I thought it would be good to see the two examples across a broad spectrum, because not every time you could run the whole journey at the same time, but in some cases that might be useful. So depending on which organization you work for, what are your key challenges, and what approach best suits you, you could take a look at it and draw some parallels, some similarities. And of course, if you have any further questions, then please feel free to reach out to me or Justin on more specific things. Okay, so without further ado, we'll go for the example around the bank. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about a large UK banking organization. It's a building society. It's been a traditional waterfall example for years and years. Their last operating model transformation was about 10, 11 years ago. They have a large change function, so even more difficult to actually convert the mindsets of people from a waterfall to Agile. It was a very well-established change function with all its procedures, policies, stage gates, engagement processes, and everybody understood and sang to the same tune. And it has worked well for them over the period of years, where basically a program had to start off, engage all the stakeholders that it was possibly touching, define all its requirements, all its design and architecture up front, which in some cases, for more complex programs could take on months, even years, where a project or a program would just be in the design phase. And at that point, when they understood well around what solution they wanted to develop, they would go out to these development centers. So essentially centers of excellence of, say, savings or mortgages or banking and systems, etc. And they would go and get quotes on how much it would take to develop the solution that they had just been through or solutionized. They would then come back with a quote. It would go through a massive negotiation exercise, lining up dates, and then managing dependencies. And then finally the build stage would start. And then, the typical SDLC process around testing, integration testing, security testing, performance testing, etc., up to a point where, the program was ready to go live, and there was a long, service readiness and IT readiness pieces of activity to, get the program ready, and then finally business readiness, and then go live. So, the organization was quite used to this process, even if they had challenges, even if they had they were suffering from pain, it was a known pain. So people did complain, but they were okay to get along with it. So what changed? So in the landscape now, suddenly you've got the Monzos, the Starlings of the financial services. They're new banks. They don't have the metros. They don't have the same legacy issues as the older banks have. They don't have a large change function. All their data is sat in the cloud. Their systems are all off the shelf. So it's much easier for them to roll out changes, to bring new products to market. And obviously, their management style and their product design style is much more bold and customer friendly as well. So what happens is, even though these are new challengers, they are gathering more and more market share. And the new management in this building society took notice of that, and they predicted that if they did nothing and they let these new entrants, even though the difference between the new entrants market share and this organization's market share was massive, where these guys were leading. So it would take a while for the new entrants to catch up. But they saw that if they did nothing, then essentially they would keep losing market share, even though they were offering good products and services. So it was almost a forced change that if they don't do anything now, they will get outperformed, in the long run. And therefore, they decided to undertake a significant people and financial investment in this agile transformation. So at this point, I also want to talk a little about how agile transformation can actually be part of something bigger. So if your organization is actually undertaking a digital transformation, which is much wider and bigger, and there are three aspects that you could be looking at. You could be looking at digitization, which is just taking parts of your processes, and whether it's change processes or business processes, and then just making it electronic than paper. And that's just digitization of a process. Digitalization of a process, however, is then taking a whole process and trying to run it completely on a digital interface, end to end. And for that, you could go for a COT solution, a off-the-shelf solution, or you could develop something in-house. But still, it looks at an end-to-end process and tries to digitalize it. However, if you look at digital transformation, which is the next level up, it is actually a change in culture mindset. It is actually making your whole organization digital, and making all the policies, the procedures, very customer centric, very employee centric. So it's all about customer experience and employee experience. And to be able to achieve that, your organization needs to have a culture of churning out changes faster. Now, in the previous example that I talked about, in the previous kind of history I gave you around this organization, it wouldn't have been possible with that kind of a structure and that kind of a process. Because changes would take so long. The employee experience was almost never thought about, and the customer experience was only very focused on what the digital screen in front of a customer would look like, but not the end-to-end process as to whether that was digital enough. And the main reason for that was that the speed of change within the organization was just not fast, just not geared up to meet up those expectations. So agile transformation therefore became a key wheel in the process to get to digital transformation. And that's a key aspect that you want to keep in mind, that when you're defining the business case for why you need to go for an agile transformation, it's very key to understand that, in my mind, there are three key aspects. There's agile transformation, there's data-driven transformation, which brings in advanced analytics, machine learning, AI, etc. And then both of them together, combined with your digital interfaces, then give you a wider digital transformation. Again, focusing on two key things: customer experience and employee experience. So how did they go about it? They essentially took a business area, let's say payments, for example, and essentially made them encourage the leadership within that team to essentially start off doing digital transformations bit by bit within their area. And over a period of a year, essentially they took their organization from completely waterfall to completely agile. Now, once they had rolled out this change within a small business area, they then took that as a example, a working example within the organization for the others to see. And even though this particular department was still working within a silo, and the others were still waterfall, it allowed others to actually see a working example of how things might work, and basically adopt those policies. Yeah, it almost kind of created a internal healthy competition between many departments to be like them. Now, if you zoom in a little bit into how this payments area did that, essentially it also then broke down. At one point they had a set of deliverables that were going through waterfall. So they had a set of programs and projects which were in flight in a waterfall mode. So it required a lot of courage and leadership support to essentially speak to the business stakeholders and say, look guys, we are going to cause some temporary inconvenience as we move from one method to the other, but it's going to work out better for you in the long run. You will get more visibility of what we are developing. We will come to you more often with deliverables. And they changed the whole concept from having an end state delivery that you will get X and X delivery after 18 months. They changed that whole thing to an MVP driven approach. So they said, what is it you need to see right now as a minimum viable proposition to be able to make some decisions and get an idea of what you need 18 months later? And then they took those things and only started working on that, irrespective of what timelines, deliverables, teams they had committed to earlier. So once they had done that, then essentially they started, they had new goals and new, as they called it, OKRs. They then started coordinating with their teams essentially to upskill them in agile practices. So that itself was quite a massive exercise, training a lot of people, taking them out from their operational jobs for a couple of days, and teaching them what agile is, bringing in new agile coaches, bringing in new seating arrangements, new whiteboards. It was a completely different working arrangement than what they were used to. Having daily stand-ups, collaboration tools, which could allow people to dial in into meetings every day, face-to-face, work on PowerPoints at the same time. So there were new collaboration tools brought in. There was the office structure was changed. There was agile coaches brought in. There was training given to all of them, all the people about what agile is, and most importantly, they were allowed to make mistakes. I think that was the fundamental difference. Whereas in waterfall, the previous approach was, we have to get it right. So we have to do a lot of testing. We have to do a lot of designing upfront, and we just can't go wrong. Whereas in this case, it was all a hypothesis-based approach. Let's take a concept, let's develop it, let's take it to the client and see whether it works. And if it doesn't, then we learn from that mistake very quickly and then repeat the cycle up until that point where things are consistently better and better. So there was leadership support required. There was program management support required to actually and business support required to allow the teams to make those mistakes and learn from it. And once they had developed a good team capability, good set of programs which were ready to take that risk, and they delivered some MVPs through that approach. Essentially this particular business function was miles ahead than the rest of the organization. They were still working on waterfall, whereas these guys had now delivered projects over a period of time on Agile completely. And they had a trained workforce, 100 strong, which could deliver on Agile. So essentially they were in line with the corporate strategy more than the rest of the organization. And as I was saying, it created that healthy competition between the other business areas to catch up and learn from them. So there were a lot of knowledge sharing sessions between this area and the other areas, and slowly, that cross-pollination happened, and they are in that sort of next maturity stage of the multi-year rollout for an Agile transformation. But it was a worthwhile exercise to do. It is now delivering changes quicker. Business is getting more visibility. Business users, senior stakeholders, as well as like operational business users, get involved in designing the requirements. The design and the requirements. They every 15 days they get to see an outcome from the teams as to what they have developed, and the feedback loop is much closer compared to what it was before. Have they got everything right? Obviously not, but that's the whole point of Agile. You may not get it right in the first few iterations, but they are constantly improving. That's fundamentally what they signed up for.
Wow, that's a really good example, Pranab. Thanks very much. Okay, so Pranab, for your second example, it's a specialized insurer in the Lloyd's market. It's an example where the whole organization didn't adopt Agile cold turkey, as in your first example. It's more where there was a smaller change function and they used one program to kind of trial Agile. So back to you.
Thank you. Yes, so again, as I was saying in the last example, it was an MVP driven approach. Now, if you look at organization, at that 40,000 feet level, an MVP for a CEO to try out Agile transformation could be a business unit with which still has hundreds of people working in there and millions of pounds worth of project, or it could be a specific program where they want to try things out. So in this case, that's what they did. They had a comparatively smaller change function. Changes were faster compared to larger organizations because people know each other and it's much easier to access business users and get change delivered quicker. But it wasn't formally Agile, so to speak. However, as we were looking at, in the previous example, they saw IFRS 17, which is a regulation coming up on the insurance market, in the next 3 or 4 years. They saw IFRS 17 as an opportunity to introduce Agile transformation into the organization. Now, why is that? One of the few reasons are, IFRS 17 is a long-running program. So the time period is going to be long. However, there are the clarity for the requirements is not there always, because the regulation is developing. The information keeps trickle feeding in, and you are never in that position where you could define all your requirements upfront or study all your data upfront and then go on and design a solution against it. So it's a good it almost lends itself to Agile transformation, where you are okay to work with ambiguity, you are okay to work with information that's slowly arriving and taking shape, and you develop solutions on that pace. So what they did is essentially started off with the data analysis part in an Agile way. They broke down how much of the journey they knew about. so they, at some point they knew about, okay, these are the data elements that we are clear of, whereas something else is not. So let's start creating a data team, a data analyst, business analyst, some business users, and some people who understand the technical provisions of the regulation, and start breaking down that part of the data set, in understanding what the data requirements are, whether my data is up to the quality, and does it need a remediation. How can I grab hold of that data? Now now that I have the data, how can I profile that data, and does it meet my requirements? And that was like a real small MVP that they could do, isolate themselves from all the ambiguity that was going on around them, and give them time to develop their thinking while they could carry on doing this. Now this little bubble of this data discovery and analysis then slowly took shape into almost like a central data function, which on its backlog, then it started to have more and more elements that needed to be looked at as understanding of the regulation became more clear, and there were more source systems from where we needed to grab more data, and there was more transformation to be done on that data to be loaded onto a regulatory tool which would do the calculations for IFRS 17. So they utilized that momentum that had built up slowly to really supercharge this journey around iterative delivery. And even though the program initially had started as a waterfall project, this allowed them to actually transform it into an agile program, in its kind of almost in its natural course. Now, obviously, the requirements still kept changing. Delays still kept happening around when the regulation came into effect. And due to the operational demands of the business users, they had to drop in and out of, the program to support more operational activities. But because they had moved on to the agile world, if some things were not clear at that point, they went back into the backlog to be picked up in a later phase, and whatever could be worked on, they pulled that out of the backlog and then carried on. So essentially, there wasn't that there was almost a ring fencing of what was going on outside the program to what was inside the program. There was always a constant flow of demand. There was always a team ready to do it. And after a few iterations, because they had done that on a couple of different data sets, there was a good cadence. They knew what they were doing, essentially. So the program continues. It will continue for the next couple of years until IFRS 17 comes into effect. But I think by the time they finish from this, they would have essentially trialed this method so many times that they would have a decent workforce who has been through that journey, who knows what to do. And then if they start off a new program, or if they start to change the way the data function itself works from waterfall to agile, or if say they decide to create a center for regulatory response, which then looks at other regulations in the same way, then they would be able to do that because they've trialed this out. So in a short span, this was a quick journey of how these two organizations undertook the agile transformation. There is obviously much more detail at what happens at each stage, and what's the prep to be done to go into that stage, what actually goes on in that stage, and how do you move on to the next one. Me, Justin, Erica, and TBSI are actually working on that content as well, and hopefully you guys would be able to see that soon. But meanwhile, if you have any questions, if you're undertaking this journey or thinking of doing something, then please reach out to us.
Thanks very much, Pranab. I think that was a really useful and helpful overview of two real-life UK financial services organizations. One where it was a enterprise-wide change. They were forced to make the change cold turkey. And the other where Agile was applied to an in-flight program. But in both cases, I think Agile was probably more successful than what they were doing before, and hopefully will
Absolutely.
continue to do. So thanks very much.